Ladies and gentlemen, can I first of all thank Oil and Gas UK for giving us this opportunity to launch our industrial strategy for the sector here in Aberdeen. And I think our starting point is recognising that UK oil and gas is a very dynamic sector of the economy, world-class expertise in engineering, design and manufacture, in asset and operational management, training and safety. It's massively important for the economy, not just in revenue terms, but I think recent investment has been running about 11.5 billion. This year, I think it's expected to be 14 billion. We have throughout the supply chain, which is estimated to generate something over 27 billion in revenue, probably throughout the UK about 400,000 people whose livelihood depend directly or indirectly on this industry. So it is big. And our approach to it is a belief that we should think long term and that we should operate in a partnership between government and industry. And indeed, that's the whole framework of thinking around the industrial strategy, of which the oil and gas sector is an important part. Now, there are several components to this. The Treasury has created a fiscal forum to create the right kind of tax environment and stability around tax. I know you've had ups and downs in the past, but I think there is now an acceptance that this has to be stable and predictable and favourable to exploration and production. Ed Davey will talk about his role, and a very central role in sustaining oil and gas production. I want to talk about the supply chain as that affects my work in business innovation skills. But I thought before doing that, I just wanted to make a couple of observations as somebody who was once in the oil and gas industry as it relates to the current debate. I think the first is the dangers of this rather simplistic peak oil view that sometimes circulates. I mean, some of you remember, if you've been in the industry, there's this saga of predictions about future oil production. I think back in the 1880s, the United States Department of Mines started predicting that world oil supplies would run out after 20 years. And every decade since, they predicted that world oil supplies would run out in 20 years. And they still are. And that applies both in general and it applies to particular basins. But those of you who are in the industry know that technology is developing very rapidly. Horizontal drilling has changed production possibilities. The vastly more sophisticated seismic developments mean that exploration wells are these days much more accurate and much less, the error is much reduced. The technology is enabling exploration to take place in much deeper waters and in much more difficult conditions, all of which raises the potential for production. So although I think nobody expects production in the North Sea to go back to 4.5 million barrels a day of oil or oil equivalent, nonetheless, Oil and Gas UK have produced plausible estimates of increased production, and I think all we know about past history suggests that we should certainly entertain that kind of possibility. I think a similar observation I just want to make about price. One of the things I didn't know when I was in the industry was that under no circumstances should you be fooled into believing that you can predict the price of oil. In fact, the day I took up my job in Shell, I was given a plaque which was in Arabic, and I was obviously expected to ask the chairman of the managing directors what it meant, and he translated it and said that those who claim to be able to predict the future are lying, even if by chance they're later proved right. And that seems to me always the right way to approach oil prices. And it is highly relevant to the current debate about oil revenue. You know that the Scottish Government has produced a range of estimates of oil revenue based on fairly optimistic views about price. The Office of Budget Responsibility, which is totally politically independent, has come up with a lower range. Now, I don't know, and none of us know who's right. I mean, the simple point is that there is a massive level of uncertainty. And it does seem to me to be rather reckless to base revenue assumptions on a rather limited range of very optimistic price assumptions. That may or may not be right. What is absolutely clear is that a bigger country is better able to absorb shocks than a smaller country. Simply basic logic. I mean, we've seen over the last year that a relatively modest change in oil production has a significant effect on UK GDP, which is a lot of the arguments at the moment about whether we have double-dip recessions or not centre around changes in oil and gas production. Now, for an economy 10 times smaller, the shock would be so much proportionately bigger. And so I think we do need to remember those facts when we're debating these politically very sensitive issues. But I just want to revert to my day job, which is talking about the oil and gas supply chain and industry. And I think there are several ways in which we can develop what is already a really excellent world-class supply chain. I mean, I was taken round by my parliamentary colleagues, Sir Malcolm Bruce and Sir Bob Smith, a year or so ago around the Aberdeen supply chain, and there are some superb companies, but we do know also that there are gaps in the supply chain, particularly in fabrication, and we want to work with the industry and see how we can develop this. We know that looking forward, there are some major challenges for the industry, one of which is skills. I mean, this isn't just a problem for oil and gas. There is a chronic problem looking to the long term in terms of engineering skills, both at craftsman level and graduate level. I mean, it is absolutely chronic. And the pipeline of young people coming through across the UK is simply inadequate. Very serious deficient, particularly in young women coming through with engineering and with the basic physics to do engineering degrees. And we've really got to work systematically, strategically, to build up an interest in engineering careers. But in the meantime, trying to get a proper clearinghouse for talent. We have something at a UK level called the Talent Retention Scheme, which is helping people to switch quickly from declining areas like defence manufacture into expanding areas. And there are other ways, for example, of helping people to recite quickly from the armed forces. But we do need to think about skills in a long-term strategic way. And then about technology. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which we can, at a UK level, promote technology development within the industry, and we should do so. And bodies like the Technology Strategy Board are beginning to focus more actively on oil and gas technologies in parallel with developments in renewables. I think it was Sir Malcolm Bruce pointed out to me a couple of years ago, brought along some academics from Aberdeen University, that we have some very, very good people here researching in subsea technologies, but it hasn't in the past had the support it should have been, and that I think is now beginning to be rectified. In fact, only yesterday there was an announcement of a big centre opening in Newcastle, hopefully working in parallel with the institutions in Aberdeen. And then we have access to finance. I mean, I know from problems across the UK that small, medium-sized companies have difficulties getting access to finance from the banks. That's a continuing problem. I don't want to underestimate it. We are making a whole lot of interventions, including the establishment of a British Business Bank to support new entrants into the banking market, generally to create more flexible, varied flows of funds to the smaller companies within the supply chain, and that remains an absolute priority and something we have to discuss with you. But I just want to conclude by saying that we don't want your industry to feel that you're being taken for granted by the UK government. You're not. We know it's an important sector. It's a dynamic sector. We want to get behind it. I've come here, I mean, not just to preach, but to learn. After I've finished my session with you, I'm going to the Expros $2.5 million well intervention facility. Then I go back to my old company to talk to them about the $2 billion a year now that they're investing in the North Sea, and then a UK fabrication company, Global Energy, and my ministerial colleagues will be, I think, similarly visiting parts of the industry while we're here. So thank you very much for coming and engaging with us, and thanks to Oil and Gas UK and to Gordon Ballard, who's leading the oil and gas forum that we've established to have an ongoing dialogue with your industry. Thank you.